It is clear that there are big differences between a child and an adult. Clevelanders knew this in 1902, when Cuyahoga County created the second juvenile court system in the entire United States. But today, we are not using the Cuyahoga County juvenile justice system effectively. Our current elected prosecutor's obsession with jailing children as young as 14 in adult prison, while disregarding evidence-based, age-appropriate intervention, is both creating a new generation of criminals and drastically worsening racial disparities within our community. In 2020, Cuyahoga County accounted for almost half of all bindovers in Ohio, and 92% of the children bound over in Cuyahoga County are black. Now more than ever, voters and elected officials across Cuyahoga County are grappling with complicated questions behind why our justice system is failing our children and our community. These questions include: what is a bindover? Who proposes bindovers? Why does Cuyahoga County have so many more bindovers than similar counties? What is driving the overrepresentation of black youth in the bindover rate? Let's dive into the policy research that exists on the topic. Children end up in adult court and prison through a process called a bindover. A bindover is the transfer of a child accused of a crime from juvenile court to adult court, where their case proceeds as if they were an adult. When these children are sentenced to time in prison, they must serve that time in adult prison instead of in Ohio's juvenile prison system. Bindovers can fall under two categories: mandatory and discretionary. Mandatory bindovers occur when state law determines that a juvenile must be transferred to adult court. These determinations are based on the age of the child, the type of crime, and the child's prior criminal record. Ohio is one of only a dozen states that still has mandatory bindovers. When the criteria for a mandatory bindover is not met, prosecutors have the power to ask for a child charged with certain crimes to be transferred to adult court by using what is called a discretionary bindover. Ohio law allows a prosecutor to make the case that the child is a threat to public safety and ask that they be transferred to adult court. At this point, mental health, education, family situation, and history of the child are taken into account before a decision is made. We can trace the usage of bindovers to the 1990s, when overblown proclamations of a crime wave led to a push for tough-on-crime policies. During this time, Ohio joined other states in passing laws to make youth transfers to adult courts more routine by expanding the situations in which bindovers could be used. In the 2010s, as more research became available, the rate of bindovers decreased in Cuyahoga County until the incumbent prosecutor was elected in 2016. When 92% of children who are transferred to adult court in Cuyahoga County are black, it is important to understand what factors are causing this enormous disparity. Systemic racism, poverty, redlining, lead poisoning, and violence all create trauma for these children, who are then more likely to act out. Trauma changes the way a child's brain works, often leading to riskier behavior without the ability to truly understand the consequences. Adult prison is inappropriate for children. We know there are important differences in how a child's brain functions as compared to an adult. Children do not have the same impulse control or decision-making ability that adults over 25 have, nor do they have the ability to fully understand the consequences of their actions. But, because a child's brain is still developing, they have a greater opportunity for rehabilitation than an adult. They also have a greater opportunity to learn, internalize, and reinforce bad behaviors, which is what happens in the adult prison system. In addition, the trauma a child is more likely to experience in adult prison can have effects that reverberate throughout their life. Children in adult prison are 5 times more likely to be sexually assaulted, 8 times more likely to die by suicide, and almost twice as likely to be physically assaulted. Any one of these experiences can cause devastating consequences to a child's health and well-being while perpetuating the cycle of trauma. It is clear that bindovers do not make us safer. Instead, they create a new generation of criminals. Bindovers do not hold the child or the system accountable for their rehabilitation. A child who serves time in adult prison is 34% more likely to commit a crime upon release than a child who is kept in the juvenile system for the exact same charge. Last year, Cuyahoga County sent 4 times more children to adult court than the next highest Ohio county. To understand why this happens, we need to take a look at the role the prosecutor plays in bindovers. The term mandatory bindover suggests that there is no choice but to transfer these cases, but this is not entirely true. 2 things greatly influence mandatory bindovers. First, mandatory bindovers are based on the charges levied against a child. Because a county prosecutor has discretion over the charges they bring, including in juvenile court, mandatory bindovers are sometimes increased if a prosecutor's office has a practice of overcharging. Second, the vast majority of cases serious enough to warrant a bindover involve children with many, many prior juvenile cases. We know that appropriate early intervention for very young children who come into the system can keep those children out of the system long term. This careful attention on these less serious cases will prevent the serious juvenile crime we've seen under the incumbent's tenure. That is why it is imperative that the prosecutor have a deep understanding of the harms the juvenile justice system can cause, as well as which evidence-based interventions will provide the greatest possibility of healing and rehabilitation in the long term. The prosecutor's office can significantly reduce the use of bindovers by carefully considering the charges brought forth, along with refusing to request discretionary bindovers when it is not mandated by law. We are seeing a rise in juvenile crime due to the failed policies of the current county prosecutor. Since he took office in 2017, the number of children sent to adult court has more than doubled. This massive increase is not happening in other large counties in Ohio. Data shows that other large counties like Franklin County and Hamilton County saw a reduction of bindovers by 28% and 24% respectively. These failed policies are disproportionately harming the Black community by a significant margin. Once again, 92% of children bound over in Cuyahoga County are Black, despite Black children making up only 40% of the youth population in the county. The current county prosecutor's office is not set up to effectively prevent serious juvenile crime. Instead, the unit's structure and failure to prioritize early intervention ultimately affects the community's safety. Because there are no permanent attorneys in the juvenile unit of the prosecutor's office, with only a couple exceptions, they often do not have the expertise to understand how to best proceed with these juvenile cases. Instead of understanding the ways in which the prosecutor's office can intervene early to prevent serious juvenile crime, the juvenile unit instead cycles children in and out of the system repeatedly until they commit a crime that the office sees as a potential bindover. To promote public safety, it is essential that we address the cycle of trauma that plagues our communities. The earlier we can reach children who are going down the wrong path, the easier it is to break this cycle. The juvenile court exists to help children receive essential services that can allow them to change course, with the goal that they do not re-enter the system. When children are transferred to the adult justice system, several levels of that accountability are lost. The child is not accountable to the community through rehabilitation work, and the system sidesteps accountability by neglecting to fulfill the mission of the juvenile court. I'm Matthew On, and I approve this message.